227 drug shortages hit America in the second quarter alone of this year, the third consecutive rise of its kind. And the shortages now include chemotherapy drugs, the ones cancer patients cannot skip. Here's the full story down below.
There is a chair in a hospital infusion suite that is sitting empty this week, not because the patient got better and not because they missed an appointment. The chair is empty because the drug that was supposed to go into it ran out. And here's the part that should stop you cold. That drug costs about $9 a vial. The richest country in the history of the world cannot reliably get enough of a $9 medicine. I want to be careful with this one because real families are living inside this story right now. So let me tell you exactly what this is and what it is not. This is not a story about science failing or doctors failing or cancer winning. It is a story about math, about a small number of quiet economic decisions made in rooms no patient ever sat in that emptied that chair. So here is what I am going to show you: how a medicine that costs a few dollars became something hospitals have to ration, the exact chain of decisions that did it, and why the fix everyone applauded 3 years ago turned out to fix nothing at all. I'll start with the drug itself. Cisplatin is a cancer medicine that came off patent decades ago, and that one fact drives everything. When nobody owns a drug, anybody can make it, and the only thing left to compete on is who can make it cheapest. Now at the buyers. Most American hospitals do not buy their drugs directly. They buy through giant middlemen called group purchasing organizations, which negotiate on behalf of thousands of hospitals at once and hand the contract to whoever bids the lowest. Do that year after year, and the price of an old drug gets ground down to just a few dollars a vial. Roughly a tenth or less of what medicines that never go short cost. And that is where the trap snaps shut. At a few dollars a vial, there is simply no money left to build a backup plant. No money to keep a second production line warm. No money for the deep quality investment that reliable manufacturing demands. So the careful, reliable makers, the ones who spend that money, lose the contract to the cheapest bidder and eventually just quit. The whole country's supply of a drug narrows down to 1 or 2 aging factories. And that means the entire system is always sitting just one bad inspection away from empty. Now, I want to be fair because there is real good news here and you deserve to hear it. This cheap generic system saves the country hundreds of billions of dollars a year, and that is not nothing. And relief is actually arriving right now. Cisplatin supply specifically is expected to ease within weeks. And a new company backed by Mark Cuban recently started making some of these very drugs at a plant in Texas, which is exactly the kind of domestic backup the country has been missing. But easing is not the same as fixed. The drug at the center of the crisis this summer, called ifosfamide, could stay short for 6 months to a year. And the deeper machine that created all of this has not changed one bit, because you have seen this exact pattern before, just in other industries. When the only thing anyone is allowed to compete on is who is cheapest, the reliable producer is always the first to lose and the first to walk away. It hollowed out manufacturing towns. It hollowed out entire supply chains. The only difference this time is that the thing being hollowed out is the chemotherapy ward. So what actually knocked it over? In late 2022, FDA inspectors walked into a plant in India that by trade estimates at the time made roughly half of all the cisplatin used in America. They found serious problems, and that plant went offline.
Hey everyone, real quick, just to jump in, the Dominate Debt course is on sale. When medical bills start compounding, the priority ladder decides who absorbs them. And Dominate Debt is the sequencing playbook that puts you in front of the wave, not underneath it. Get out of debt once and for all. Check it out. Links down below. Now let's get back to the video.
Within months, oncology nurses were rationing doses, and families were calling 3 different pharmacies just to find one. The emergency fix was to let a manufacturer in China ship in an unapproved version under special permission. And it worked as a stopgap. Supply came back. Congress moved on. But nothing underneath actually changed. So the movie simply played again. In September of 2025, inspectors found repeated contamination at a plant in Halle, Germany that made America's ifosfamide. The FDA issued a warning letter this past March, and the fill rate for that drug collapsed to around 37%, which means barely 1 in 3 orders is getting filled. Same script, different plant, different drug, same empty chair. Because the fix in 2023 was never a real solution. It was a permission slip. And here is the thing that should really widen your eyes. Because the fix in 2023 was never a real solution. It was a permission slip. And here is the thing that should really widen your eyes. This is not just about 2 cancer drugs. Nearly half of all the new drug shortages this year come from products that have exactly one supplier. One plant, no backup. Chemotherapy is simply where the fragility became visible, because a cancer patient cannot wait a few months, and there is often no substitute drug to switch to. But that same thin math sits underneath the antibiotics, the IV fluids, and the emergency room drugs that nobody thinks about until the day one of them is gone. The price tag on a cheap vial has quietly become a kind of warning label. The lower it is, the more fragile the supply behind it. So what actually fixes this? I am going to be straight with you because it matters. There is nothing you personally can buy or stockpile that solves a national manufacturing collapse. And anyone telling you otherwise is trying to sell you something. This is a systemic failure, and it needs a systemic answer. There is a bill sitting in the United States Senate introduced back in August of 2025 by a bipartisan group led by Senators Klobuchar and Collins. That would require drug makers to warn the FDA earlier when a shortage is coming. It has sat in committee ever since with no vote. But understand exactly what that bill does, because this is the whole point. It is a notification law. It changes no prices and no margins. It would tell you the chair is about to be empty a little sooner. It would not put the drug back into it. The real fix, the one nobody has been willing to pass, is simply paying enough for these old essential drugs that a reliable company can afford to make them safely and keep a backup line standing behind them. So go back to that empty chair one last time. It did not empty because of a war or a natural disaster or a scientific dead end. It emptied because a medicine got so cheap that making it safely and reliably stopped being worth anyone's while. And because the last time this happened, the country reached for a permission slip instead of a real solution. The chemo ward is just the first place this got loud enough for the rest of us to finally hear it. The antibiotics and the IV bags and the emergency drugs run on the very same thin margins and the very same single plants. The molecule was never the hard part. The math was, and the math has not changed. Economic Ninja is out.